there's still, yeah, someone needs to be in the middle. And climate cleanup is focusing, on providing these tools in several fields. So, for example, construction stored carbon, regenerative agriculture for soil stored carbon. And I'm focusing on ocean stored carbon with my thesis. Just to give you an example, maybe what they're doing right now, they are off to COP in Glasgow together with ASN Bank. It's a Dutch bank focusing on sustainable financing. And they are presenting a financial metric that helps to promote bio-based building. So that's one way they try and implement climate mitigation solutions. But I am focusing on marine solutions, and in my research specifically on mangrove restoration. How can we develop the same tools and translation that's necessary for mangrove restoration in order to get this to policymakers and investors that should know about what mangrove restoration brings? The ideology of climate cleanup is really based on a list of 100 climate solutions that were listed in the publication of Drawdown in 2017. And Drawdown is a publication by a group of researchers led by environmentalist Paul Hawken, and they defined all sorts of solutions that draw down 1,500 kilos of gigatons, sorry, of CO2 from the air, so we can mitigate climate change. The solutions really range from girls' education to reforestation, but the weird thing is that marine solutions were not really, well, barely mentioned in this publication, which is weird because there is, of course, a great potential that is already known in the academic realm. So there was something missing there. Therefore, climate cleanup translated this list to Dutch. So that's what they are really basing their efforts on. And now, just in September, a new book was published, Regeneration, by the same group of researchers, also led by Paul Hawken. And regeneration is really focusing on the regeneration of nature, providing new insights and data on the solutions that are promising for ending the climate crisis in one generation, which is maybe a little bit ambitious, but let's just go for it. And actually in this book, mangroves do have a separate chapter, but still they are mentioned together with salt marshes and seagrasses in a bit of a superficial manner, and the co-benefits are only mentioned briefly. And this is actually where I hope my research can be of additional value, because these co-benefits add to the potential of climate mitigation, and together this increases the value of mangrove restoration even more. And it might make it even more financially viable to invest in mangrove restoration and make it a strong business case. So it goes beyond the blue carbon potential. So basically what I want to do in my thesis is to articulate where the impact of mangrove restoration lies. But in order to define that, you need to define, okay, where do you then measure impact? What does impact mean? Are we talking about sustainability? What does sustainability then mean in that regard? For that purpose, I am working with donut economics, mostly because economics is something that is very well understood by the people that need to invest in nature regeneration. So it's a common language that people can understand in that field. And the donut economics framework is developed by Kate Rayworth, the lady in the picture. She actually has a really cool TED talk about this. She does, of course, explain it way better than I do. So I recommend you to watch that. And she also wrote a book about the mindset that kind of underlies the donut economics framework. So how economics should look like in the 21st century, focusing on a thriving planet and regenerating nature instead of just growing the GDP, for example. Later on, I will also give a few other examples of how the donut economics framework is implemented by other organizations and other initiatives. But first, let's dive into what the donut actually is before I'm going to explain how I will apply it to mangrove restoration. The donut is really showing how we can strike a balance between what the human needs and interests are to live a comfortable and meaningful life, but at the same time preventing to transgress the limits of our planet. There are, of course, certain boundaries that we cannot cross if we want to keep living on this earth with a lot of people in fair conditions. So the social foundation is something that we should safeguard in order to give everyone a good life, and the ecological ceiling is something that we should protect in order for the planet not to degrade. So quite simple. Rayworth also defined the dimensions within these two different boundaries. And this is actually based on theory that already existed long before. And here some more familiar frameworks might come in, perhaps. The social foundation is based on the SDGs. You might argue that what someone needs to live a meaningful life is very subjective. Perhaps what Sabina needs for a meaningful life is different from what Leah needs, but still on an international level, we did agree on this through the SDGs. So that's what she's using for the social foundation, in the sense of human rights, basically. For the ecological ceiling, planetary boundaries were first defined by a group of Earth system scientists in 2009. By Rupstrom, and in 2015, these planetary boundaries were upgraded with new insights and data, and they are summarizing the 9 most important dimensions of the ecological ceiling that we should protect and not transgress. Unfortunately, on a global scale, this is already happening. This is, of course, nothing new for you guys. Especially when we talk about biodiversity and climate change, that is something you are familiar with, and that is not going well. But also in the social foundation, there are, of course, still billions of people who don't have access to any of these dimensions in a fair manner yet. So this is what we could call a humanities selfie on a global scale, right? See people taking pictures, so I'll wait a few seconds.
Thanks.
But of course, the global picture, the humanity selfie, is rather big to apply to mangrove restoration, right? Mangrove restoration has a bit more of a specific context than just sustainability for humanity. So how are we downscaling the donut? That is something that I will explain right now. And it has been done on several scales, and there are a lot of examples already. For example, national donuts have been developed for over 150 countries, so they could compare. And Amsterdam has recently developed its own city donut as a circularity strategy for 2030. Climate Cleanup was also involved in guiding that process. And it's also happening for other cities. And these are, for example, the questions that the city of Amsterdam answered in developing their own donut. So they looked at both their social needs and the ecological ceiling that you need to protect. But when you look at a city donut, you are dealing with both your impact on a global level and you're dealing with impacts that you have within the city itself, right? So there's a distinction there between the local and the global level with different research questions, so to say, to answer. On a regional level, the donut has also been applied to the socio-ecological system of grassland in Inner Mongolia. This is a very recent study as well. And basically what the authors have done here is to define what kind of dimensions they want to research within the socio-ecological system of Mongolian herders letting their cattle graze on the grasslands, which is affecting the grasslands, of course. So if they want to restore that, you need certain modifications or restoration efforts, which is again impacting the grassland condition, providing taking away certain ecosystem services, depending on how well the restoration is going, right? And what I really like about this study is that it really articulates that there are external impacts that also define how effective these restoration efforts are and how effective the sustainability impact is. There are macro conditions on a global scale, such as climate change, or, for example, international policy that either promotes this process or is more of a threshold against it. And there are external systems on a more local scale that are also interacting. And this is, of course, also the case for mangrove restoration. And I think yesterday there was a presentation, of course, on the influx of sargassum, and we also talked about tourism. So that would be external systems that would fit in here, posing challenges or facilitating conditions to mangrove restoration. So in my thesis research, I want to develop a donut on the project level so that for each mangrove restoration project, we can articulate what our impact is, both on a local scale and a global scale, because the dimensions might differ. Of course, we talked about mangrove restoration contributing to the sequestration of blue carbon, which will be a global impact. And there are local impacts in the ecological realm, such as sedimentation trapping that we discussed yesterday as well. And there is, of course, the social foundation, which I will be addressing on a local scale only, because that's, of course, what's most relevant when you talk about the context of a restoration project. Yeah, that's actually what I'm doing right now. I just started my research, so I don't have any results yet, but I'm currently interviewing 8 mangrove restoration experts from projects all over the world. So I'm trying to cover different geographical contexts, cultural context as well, which is, of course, super important here. And I'm aggregating this knowledge into a donut for mangrove restoration. So the dimensions for mangrove restoration might be just a little bit different from what you've seen for humanities selfie on a global scale. This is then the process that I'm describing in my thesis, following the structure of the Mongolian grassland study. However, I added the aspect of community perception, because something that I'm also really interested in is how the state of mangroves is also perceived by the community on a local scale. So I'm doing a case study here on Bonaire, for example. And even if you know what the sustainability impact is, its true efficiency and effectiveness is also depending on how the community is feeling this in order for them to engage or to invest. And also for the project itself, that's very valuable knowledge, because you can adjust your outreach and education to this. And these are then the global macro conditions and local external systems that might pose challenges or, if it's a good thing, facilitating conditions. And something that I added to the original framework from the Mongolian grassland study is that challenges and facilitating conditions might also arise from the restoration methodology itself. I think that has actually been the core of this workshop so far. We discussed a lot of things that you should consider within the mangrove restoration process that actually define how effective in the end it's going to be. So this is the first part of the study that I'm currently doing, which is just developing this project donut for mangrove restoration. And I'm getting the indicators from the expert interviews. And this is something that I started with last week, and I'm going to finish it this week. And then the rest of my research will be focusing on the application, because I want to show that the donut is actually something useful for impact assessment of mangrove restoration. Firstly, I will apply it on a local case. So that would be Mangrove Maniacs here on Bonaire. And I will use existing literature and data to assess those dimensions in the donut framework, as far as there's, of course, literature available. And for the community perception survey here on Bonaire, I will organize a dialogue with OLB, with the local government, maybe also with Stinapa, to learn about how they see the trade-offs and synergies between other policy goals on Bonaire. And I will do a survey amongst the citizens and volunteers of Mangrove Maniacs to address different target groups. And I really hope that after my thesis research, other projects could learn from this methodology and maybe apply it for their own purposes. And in that sense, it's not just relevant for mangrove restoration, but to any kind of nature regeneration project. This last research question is a bit more technical. That's the red and pink part. It's also something that I need to work out a little bit more, because this is where modeling will come in, as I want to make a global estimation of what the potential of mangrove restoration would be if we fully invest and work on global mangrove restoration in all areas that need the restoration efforts. There is, of course, a lot of data available already through the Global Mangrove Watch. And using that data and some modeling, I want to provide certain scenarios for, okay, how is this going to mitigate climate change and addressing other SDGs as well. Now you might wonder, with regards to the last question, how are you going to translate the donut dimensions back to the SDGs? But like I mentioned in the beginning, basically all dimensions of the donut are originally derived from the SDGs. Even the planetary boundaries are speaking pretty much for themselves. So already, defining those links has been done before. As you can see, all the numbers refer to one or more SDGs. So in the end, I hope to contribute to a local understanding of the impacts of the work of Mangrove Maniacs here on Bonaire, and offer an example of how projects in other places in the world can use the donut in a similar way to articulate what their impact really is and why it's worth investing in mangrove restoration beyond the blue carbon value. In that sense, it might be really interesting if my thesis is followed up by someone who is trained in environmental economics, for example. I don't have the knowledge or experience to put monetary values on these services, but that would be a great follow-up on my thesis, I think. And on a global scale, like I said, the impact potential, both climate mitigation and the other dimensions, is something that the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency is really interested in, because the PBL, that's what it's called in Dutch, they have something called an integrated assessment model. And it's a really big computer model combining several subsystems, climate models, ocean atmosphere models, policy models, blah, blah, blah. And it's used for projecting human-nature interactions and it's supporting climate policy and the results of the IPCC reports, for example. And the PBL integrated assessment model is actually one out of the 6 IAMs that exist in the world. But the weird thing is that mangrove restoration or wetlands restoration in general is not mentioned in any of these models, which is weird, right? Because the IPCC models, IPCC reports are based on these integrated assessment models. So now PBL, my supervisor said, okay, I want to know how mangrove restoration is contributing to all these sustainability dimensions, because if the potential is indeed significant, then we might build it into the model, and then policy, climate policy, biodiversity policy is going to be based on the contribution of wetlands restoration and mangrove restoration as well. So that would be a really positive outcome, and I hope I can contribute to that in that regard. And in general, the methodology behind my thesis is not just applicable to mangrove restoration, but like I said, to any kind of restoration effort in general. I don't have any results yet. Maybe wait for that until February, but I hope to maybe spark some new ideas for you. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I first thank you for the presentation. It's so nice and a different approach to everything. I had one question. You were assessing community perception and talking to Oil Bay.
Yeah.
Will Oil Bay be the best group to what?
I felt the same. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we all. Everybody was like, Oil Bay, the connection of Oil Bay with the community is maybe somebody else
Well,
connects.
policy wise, I think it's definitely party.
No, but I think she has a point in the way because she has to look, when she does interviews, she has to look at a broad group of people. So she's looking at the public and the private sector. So in that case, the obvious choice would be OLB. Maybe to make it more standard, she would then also maybe connect with the kingdom, with the local representative, because we have both, you know, OLB nature and we have the RCN nature, and they're sometimes very different, but they align or they copy each other. But then she's also looking at the local community. But yeah, when you said that, we all had the same initial reaction.
So that's actually really interesting because, of course, you guys have a way better sense of what actually matters on this island. So any suggestion is welcome. But the funny thing is that I was actually approached through Facebook by someone working at OLB who said, "Hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Would you mind giving a talk?" And then I said, "Yeah, I can do so, but then I also want to
Make
Micah, yeah, indeed, Micah." And yesterday I mentioned this to Jan, and Jan was also Jan from Sinapa, and he said that he would also be interested in maybe engaging with this dialogue. So it could be more of a broader stakeholder dialogue.
As a part of industry, I have to interact with OLB and RCN.
Yeah.
So it's a necessary evil, and sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative.
Yeah.
But overall, it's positive, but it's difficult. So I understand your situation, and I agree. It should be.
They should be, but if I would think of community perception on Bonaire, I would never go through OLB. That's for me. Like with Lucy, we worked on the people's, the community perception on invasive species and things like that. And that was not through OLB. I don't know if you, in Holland, if you would talk about community perception, if you would approach a gemeente.
Okay, maybe that's indeed a misunderstanding with regards to the definition, because I am indeed trying to approach different target groups, amongst them the governmental institutions.
Yeah, because
You should, but maybe you should add some more. Do you have any suggestions?
for community, on Bonaire community, I have to think about that,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't be OLB if you not only, but include. Do you?
I have a question from someone else. So.
Let's talk about this
Later, yeah.
is
I will think about it because we have tried to find different stakeholders and voices and.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
something that's good to mention here as well is that from my education at Utrecht University, we're really encouraged to do transdisciplinary research, basically meaning that you don't just extract data from your study
One source,
objects,
yeah.
but you also engage in discussion. So there's already something happening within the research process that might impact your sustainability goals in a good way. So,
For instance, I would talk to Boyan Tang. He's maybe a very special community factor.
Yeah.
But he has more local or Elsmarie or like that.
That's great. Yeah. Any source would be super valuable.
Yeah, okay, we'll talk later
Yeah.
about it.
Okay.
You forgot the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Maybe I can raise a question, or maybe not just a. It's not so much a question. I'm here in Amsterdam and I'm with Climate Cleanup, and Tirza and I have been discussing her work at Bonaire for quite some time, and I can. I understand the challenges that are happening on island communities, and as Tirza said, the oceans and the coastal zones are a sort of an underestimated spot, or maybe even a blind spot for many people. And I think I would like to work a lot to give that more attention, like what's happening, what's going to happen in the COP, for instance, the COP 26, but also the International Maritime Organizations. Small island states have difficulty in raising their voices, and so this is not so much a question, but it's more like I was wondering how people can make their voices much more heard in the international arena. And when I hear about the possibilities of mangrove on climate, but also in ecosystem restoration, etc., etc., I think we should pay much more attention to that. And that's what I wanted to say. And Tirza, I think I really liked your presentation. So good luck with your work there.
Yeah, thanks.
Are there more questions for Tirza?
I have one more.
Yeah.
You talked about, you already started some interviews. Do you have any trends on the relevant indicators for the people that are doing a restoration on why they're doing it?
Depends on why people are doing restoration. Yeah. So basically impact dimensions. Yeah, so the main trends are coastal protection, climate mitigation, biodiversity, water purification. Something that has been discussed here, but something, yeah, there were of course also a few outcomes that I hadn't read about before. For example, land ownership is something that is more defined after going through a restoration process. And I talked to someone who stated that in a lot of communities, mangrove restoration is more of a social process to go through than an ecological process, because the drivers are in social problems. And I thought that was really interesting, because yeah, the issue of land ownership is not something that I've heard in the past 2 days here. And of course, it really differs between where you are. And here we are all focusing on the Caribbean region, but it might be very different in Indonesia, Philippines, you name it. Yeah. And also a negative impact that was mentioned by someone who's been involved with over 50 mangrove restoration projects is with regards to the dimension of political voice, that he found that many mangrove restoration processes were also leading to conflicts within the community, because people just didn't agree on priorities, didn't agree on a fair share of the outcomes, blah, 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 blah. And he said that's actually a really big risk in all of the projects that I've worked in. So yeah, it's not all great. Yeah.
Koekanek.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, next up we have Secure Hunt coming from the St. Lucia Trust, National Trust. So we'll get her up on the screen.
Is Safira muted? Huh?
Yes.
Well, Safira, and thank you for being able to present at such short notice. Everybody welcome Safira of St. Lucia National Trust.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us this afternoon. With me, I have Vincent Clark. He's our mangrove custodian. Let me just let him slide into view.
Yes, Sabine. Good afternoon, everybody.
So I will carry on and present on the Makote Mangrove, which the National Trust manages. Feel free to ask questions towards the end of the presentation, and we will try to answer as best as possible. So, background of Makote. Makote Mangrove is approximately 40 hectares. It is the largest mangrove within the southeast coast of St. Lucia. At Makote, we have all 4 species of mangroves: red, white, black, and buttonwood. In 2002, it was declared a Ramsar site under the Convention of the Ramsar. Yes. And Makote is a host to many livelihoods. We have community groups using the resources at Makote Mangrove to do sustainable livelihoods. So we have ecotourism. There's a group called Eco South Tours who does bike tours and hiking tours through the trails at the mangrove. Towards the coastline, we have the Opiko Chaco producers doing sea moss farming along the coast. And we have the same group doing beekeeping within the mangrove ecosystem. Now to the real reason why we're in this restoration workshop, mangrove dieback. Back in 2010, satellite images picked up dieback within the Makote mangrove. And in 2015, we did some ground truthing to actually confirm the dieback. As you can see in the photos, the dieback was pretty much intensive and we have bare bones trees remaining. In this photo, you can see that's aerial shots of the mangrove, and you can see the dieback area back in 2017. This is 2021. As of last week, we were in a drone training and we took this aerial footage. I'm hoping that you can see my cursor. You can see we have dieback areas all the way from here, going down to the opening and all around. So the dieback area has actually extended from what it was a couple of years ago. Our restoration efforts in the past has, we got funding from the Ekman project to assist with some restoration efforts where we did some assessments in the mangrove and some rehabilitation works when it came to replanting the mangrove. Under the Ekman project, we collected 4,000 red mangrove seeds and planted them in a nursery on site. Along with community groups and government agencies, we had a week in November called Mangrove Week, where we replanted all 4,000 mangrove seed saplings. Of course, there are always threats to our ecosystem. At Makote Mangrove, one of our biggest threats is the illegal dumping of garbage, both industrial and household waste. Funny enough, the landfill is across the road from the mangrove. Why persons choose not to go to the landfill and come to the mangrove to dump is beyond us all. We do have farming happening upstream, and we have leaching of pesticides and herbicides down the same waterway that flows through the mangrove. There is unsustainable cutting of mangrove trees for charcoal and for wood. However, the Opika charcoal producers were trained on the Canary back in the early 90s to sustainably harvest mangrove for charcoal production. The unsustainable cutting are persons outside of the group. Then we have the ongoing threat to every Caribbean island when it comes to tourism development. At one point, there was the mangrove was proposed for marina development. I should have noted that Makote Mangrove is a basin mangrove, so it starts from the mainland onto the coastal area. So putting a marina into the mangrove was not ideal. And currently, we have a project called the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Project, and that recognizing the dieback and the efforts we did back in 2017, where we had a success rate, it was not 100% successful, and we have not mitigated the reasons for the dieback. So EBA is now funding us for us to go ahead and do more assessments within the mangrove, and then to see how possibly we can rehabilitate the die out area. Currently, we have collected 500 seeds and propagules, and then that's of each species. And we have 2,000 species of red, white, and black mangrove being germinated in our nursery on site. Under the mangrove assessment, the National Trust with a consultancy from Trinidad, Institute of Marine Affairs, last week was in the mangrove collecting data and samples so that they can analyze. The assessment will provide a comprehensive information on the state of health of the mangrove. It will also help give us recommendations and rehabilitation plans moving forward. It gives us a living inventory of the species found in the mangrove and hopefully what causes or the potential cause of the dieback. The consultants from IMA also held stakeholder consultations with governmental agencies and the resource users within the mangrove. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. Feel free to ask any questions if you have, and we will try our best to answer.
Does somebody have a question?
So I have a question. Hello, can you come here? Hello, Safira, right?
Yes.
So do you have any hunches or strong ideas what was the main cause for the dieback?
Don't quote me on saying this, but there are a lot of reasons that could potentially lead to the dieback. One being that the landfill is across from the mangrove, it's only separated by a road. So there may be leaching from the whatever water or let's say decomposing material from the landfill into the mangrove. 12 years ago, our main hospital in the south of the island burnt down, and it is now housed at the stadium, the National Stadium, which is across the road from the mangrove. So for the past 12 years, the National Hospital is housed directly across from the mangrove. So we don't know if there is any leaching from that source. On the northern side of the mangrove, there is an asphalt and mining plant. And then further to that, there is a construction plant. So there are many factors that could possibly be the cause for the dieback. And of course, we have upstream, farmers are damming the rivers to water the farm. So that kind of limits the water flow into the mangrove. So not much flushing is happening. But of course, that's just my observation. That is not concrete evidence.
Okay, thank you.
Most welcome.
That definitely sounds like multiple potential factors for a dieback, like hydrology, pesticides, whatever, pollutants. Anybody else has a question? No? Okay, thank you, Safira.
Thank you.
Hope to meet you on the next workshop, and we'll try to plan that more ahead of time, so it's no last minute. But thank you very much.
Thank you for having
Yes,
us.
Okay, who's up next? Do we have?
Okay, so next up we have Roxanne. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So we could either we need a vacuum break, fill coffee, and then start Synopsis presentation. Yeah, everyone stretch a little bit. Let me get you loaded up. Yeah.
Good afternoon. The next presentation is Promoting Biodiversity and Sustainable Use in Lac Bay by Rox Francisca. She's with Sinapa Nature Department, and one of her focus and expertise areas is water quality. So we hope she can tell us everything about that in this presentation. Everything. So say hello to Rox.
Yeah, so like Sabine said, my name is Roxanne, but you can call me Rox. Pretty much the only person who calls me Roxanne is my mom, and only when she's angry. And I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about Sinapa's vision, Sinapa's plans for Lac Bay, which includes a little bit about water quality. Now, Sabine has asked me to tell you everything about water quality, and everything we know about water quality in Lac, I can tell you in one word, because it is nothing. We don't know almost anything. There is a lot of unknowns, and this is one of those things that we really want to work on if we want to understand the system and how it's changing a little bit more over the coming years. So just a really brief introduction. I should have included a map of Bonaire, but I think everybody by now knows where Lac Bay is. The report on the state of the world's mangroves came out recently, and while the report does say that mangroves are still disappearing, it is also encouraging because it highlights that mangroves are really susceptible to restoration efforts, and there are a lot of areas where mangroves can be improved. So they looked at what were the main reasons for mangrove loss around the world. The first one being conversion of habitats for commercial uses. So think of mangroves being converted for fish farms, for shrimp farms, that kind of stuff. Luckily, not a big problem for us here on Bonaire, so not something we really have to worry about. Hopefully it stays that way. The next one was non-productive conversion. So you can think of direct impacts where people are clearing the mangroves to use the wood or clearing the mangroves for charcoal. And then the other one is indirect impacts related to water, which is my thing, right? So when we talk about water, we can think about changes in hydrology, changes in the presence and absence of water, and changes in the water quality. So pollution, nutrient runoff, all these kinds of things can have an impact on your entire system. And then the last one is because of infrastructure, urbanization, and a little bit also coastal tourism. So these two, not the clearance, but the indirect impacts of changes in water quality and infrastructure and coastal developments are things that Bonaire needs to worry about. The mangroves, most of our mangroves are protected, so it would take a lot to have someone just come in and start demolishing mangroves left, right, and center. But we do have to talk about water quality in our bays and in our marine park in general. So if we look at the area of Lac, it is really a multi-use zone. So Lac is a Ramsar site. It is ecologically important. It is a biodiversity hotspot, but it's also a recreational and economically important site. So you can think of people going kayaking. These are our junior rangers kayaking. There's a lot of windsurfing activities. People go snorkeling, there's fishing. People just go there on a Sundays to go to the beach with their families. So it is really a site that is really important, and there are lots of uses. But of course, with lots of uses in an area, usually that can generate a little bit of conflict. So what we have so far from Sinapa is we have a zonation map of Lac, and the zonation map dictates in which areas, which activities can take place. And this is a little bit to alleviate the use pressure, to spread out the different uses, but also to help protect the environment of Lac. So really sensitive areas are a little bit better protected. For instance, there are areas where you are allowed to windsurf, there are other areas where you're not allowed to windsurf. We really try to communicate about the importance of the seagrasses and encourage people to stay off of our seagrass beds. Of course, always room for improvement, and I will touch back on that later. So if we look at Lac Bay, it's really beautiful and it's really important, but it's also facing a lot of threats. So one of the main threats to Lac Bay, and this is not just Lac, this is most places on Bonaire, is increasing visitation. We have our island, our population is growing. We went from 10,000 people about 9 years ago to 21,000 people. We are also getting a lot more tourists. Just today, probably if you were to go to Lac, since we have a cruise ship in, it's going to be completely overrun by tourists. We of course also have invasive species moving in. Think of the invasive seagrass that is taking away habitat from the native seagrass species and changing the ecosystem. We also have development that is happening around the bay and all over the island, which of course also has impacts on your coastlines. And a big one recently for us is sargassum landings. So since 2018, every year Bonaire has had to deal with sargassum landings with varying degrees of success. But this is one of the ones that is really having an impact on our mangrove systems, the seagrass bed, and really the entire systems in Lac. So if we were to talk specifically about water quality, there have been quite a few studies done here and there sporadically around the island looking at water quality. The main problem with all these studies is they're like kind of one-off. So someone comes, they do it for a year or two, they use their own methods, they have their own sites, and most of them are not comparable. So I can't say what is really happening with the water quality. We can see indications like on our reefs that the water quality is deteriorating because of increasing algae or increasing cyanobacteria, but we don't really have those like, this is what the nutrient concentration was 10 years ago, and this is how it's changed. And then if you look specifically at the area of Lac, in 2013, the island government conducted a study that was looking at groundwater flows that included sewage discharge. So for this study, they had 32 points all around the island, and 6 of those were around the area of Lac. And then they looked specifically at the concentrations of fecal bacteria. So these are bacteria that are mostly only found in sewage because they only occur in the, in the intestinal system of warm-blooded mammals. One could argue for goats, I guess, but it's mostly people. And what they found was, so from the 6 points around Lac, this was in 2016, so it is a while back. One of the sites, which is where there is development, at this site, the groundwater that was flowing there had such high concentrations of fecal bacteria that it would be unsafe for recreation. So the levels were astronomical. And then for the other ones, where they looked, the levels of fecal bacteria were a lot lower. But you can imagine things have changed. The island has gotten bigger since 2013. So we don't really know how the situation has changed. And there is also a lot of drainage happening into Lac, all of which can have a really big impact on the water quality all over your bay. So when we talk about water quality, there are, of course, the acute impacts, which are, let's say, sargassum hits. In the spot where it hits, it starts to decompose. As it decomposes, all kinds of things are released. Think of heavy metals, think of nutrients. That is a direct impact in that particular area. But we also see chronic impacts, which are impacts that are happening further away from where the sargassum is hitting. So when Luc was doing his study, what he saw on some of the satellite pictures was, even though the sargassum was maybe hitting in this area or this area, a few days to a few weeks later, you could see plumes of organic material that were making their way through the bay. So this means that even though the sargassum hits, let's say it only hits here, the impacts of it, especially the long-term impacts of it, are not concentrated just to that area. What exactly these impacts are, what the magnitude of these impacts are, that we don't know yet. These are things we're still working on. And in the long run, if we have to keep dealing with sargassum landings, increasing coastal development, what we are going to move towards is that the entire bay is going to be eutrophied. So it's going to be less clear, less productive, probably smell less great than what it is right now, which has an impact, of course, ecologically, but also an impact economically and socially, since it is also a site that a lot of people like to use for various uses. So we talk a whole lot about Lac, but we do also have another bay that is Lagoon. And Lagoon is located to the north of Lac, also has mangroves, also has seagrass beds, also suffers from sargassum impacts. And Lagoon has even more water quality concerns than Lac because similar to the previous presentation, we have a dump really close to lagoon. Dump is, I think this way.
This way.
So whatever is being dumped at the dump, anytime we have huge rain events, is all just being washed straight into the lagoon. There are, I mean, serious concerns for the quality of the water in this area. And I have heard from multiple fishermen that, you know, a couple of years, 10, 20 years back, they would go through the mangroves and it was full of lobsters and big ass lobsters, of course, fishermen, so many grains of salt. And now when they go there, they find nothing. Like the entire bay is just mostly dead. What exactly is happening in lagoon, we don't know. Lagoon is also a little bit more complex and complicated when it comes to sargassum landings because it's more difficult to clean up, which means there is more chance for the sargassum to accumulate and decompose. But it is definitely on our radar. So knowing that there are all these threats, all these issues affecting the area of Lac specifically, we submitted a proposal to Resemble that was focusing on restoring the marine biodiversity and improving the sustainable use in Lac. We're seeing that there are competing interests, of course, in the area because the commercial partners want to be able to exploit it. They want to be able to make more money, of course. And then we want to be able to protect this incredibly important nature area. So to that end, we wrote up a proposal for a project that would take both aspects into account. And the main objectives of this project would be, of course, first, ecosystem restoration. We didn't include mangroves because Mangrove Maniacs is already doing a really good job, but specifically focusing on the seagrass beds and the coral reef that is right outside of Lac. We also want to be able to understand and promote sustainable use of the area. So understanding a little bit better, what are the concerns of the different commercial partners? What is it that they're looking for? But also how can they help us to be able to better manage this area? So one of the things we want to do is set up a cooperative management board that includes not only the nature NGOs, but also some of the commercial partners to be able to manage the area in such a way that everybody can benefit. And of course, nature can benefit as well. Another part of the proposal is to be able to better enforce nature regulations. Now, this does not mean go out and write a lot of fines. It mostly means we want to enhance the awareness of people of the importance of the area, or what the rules are, what the regulations are, and why they're in place, and essentially increase compliance with the nature regulations, but also by increasing awareness, increasing people in your local community who themselves have a vested interest in making sure that other people are following the rules. And lastly, of course, we want to be able to get a better grasp on the water quality in the area, how this is changing, and what are the possible interventions that we could institute. So for this, think, for example, multiple sampling points throughout the bay that are being sampled, not just during a sargassum event, but before and after as well. And then also looking at what are things that we could implement, water quality specifically, to be able to increase the quality of the water and safeguard the ecosystem. Now, of course, a really big aspect of this is sargassum response. Sargassum is really kind of our biggest headache, especially in spring when it starts to come and everybody is very stressed. So for our sargassum response, we have a separate project that we're working on together with the local government and the national government. And our sargassum response really has two facets, really. So first, there is monitoring. We use satellite monitoring by CLS. I do not remember what it stands for, but if anybody really wants to know, I will look it up. They have a satellite monitoring program that allows you to track sargassum mass while they're out on the open ocean. And they also have a prediction software that allows you to predict the most likely trajectory of those sargassum mass. So every year, right around sargassum season for us, we buy a subscription and then we monitor it every day. Now, Lac is relatively small, right? So for us, a sargassum mass doesn't need to be that big to be a problem, which is a problem for the software, because the software can only detect patches that I think at least 50, I don't remember, 50 square meters in size. And the smaller patches that are drifting, it can't detect those, which is a problem for us, because even those smaller patches can be a big headache for us. So we not only monitor for trajectories that are coming to Bonaire, we also kind of take a look at how the currents are going and patches in the vicinity. And then if we think, okay, this has a very high likelihood that it will be coming to Bonaire, we send out patrols. So we send out our rangers and they do a patrol along the coast. And if they detect big patches, then they let us know so that we can start our response a little bit earlier. And then the next part of it is, of course, just the cleanup. So for the last couple of years, we have been working with less than ideal materials, but we are making it work. So we are using oil booms that we borrowed from the harbor master. Of course, these booms are really lightweight. They're not ideal for sargassum. And we know this. And of course, the harbor master himself needs his oil booms for if there's an oil spill. So we have a limited quantity of booms that we can set out, which means we really need to prioritize which areas we are going to funnel off. What we do is we put the booms in the water and we try to direct the sargassum to specific extraction points. Now the plan, and then once it gets to the extraction point, we have people with rakes and wheelbarrows getting it out of the water. It is really difficult work. It's really hard. The sun is really hot. And of course, as soon as the sargassum starts to decompose, it starts to smell, it starts to rot. In the first few years, we had people go home and get rashes or be nauseous. We don't really know what the impacts are on human health if you have to work in the sargassum for too long. And then last year, we also had a loader that helped us with clearing of some of the sargassum, which makes our jobs a little bit easier, but also, of course, has impacts on the sand and the system around it. And then in Lagoon, which is the other bay, it only gets cleaned up by heavy equipment because it is really hard to put people there. And as soon as it starts to accumulate, it's unsafe. But recognizing that this is not ideal and there is still quite a lot of damage that is being caused, we do have to say that even these limited actions that we have been able to do in LAC seem to make a difference. If you look at the overall condition of the mangroves in Lagoon versus the overall conditions of the mangroves in LAC, it seems like LAC is a little bit better off. For the following years, we of course want to improve our sargassum response. For that, we are working together to get long-term sustainable financing from the local and the national government that would allow us to get the necessary equipment, hire the people we need to clear it, and then also just be able to better respond to it, be better prepared. We are currently finalizing our sargassum response plan that is being written with the local government. And as part of that plan, we now have money to acquire some specific sargassum booms and sargassum anchors. So that alone will already make a huge difference in how we will be able to respond to sargassum if it hits next year. We are also looking for contracts with different suppliers, different vendors that have some of the equipment we need. Think of like dirty water pumps. It is much more efficient to hire it than to own it. And then we're also working on ways to just improve or looking at ways to improve our forecasting for sargassum landings. If we're able to predict when sargassum will hit and about how big a hit it'll be, that allows us to better plan our response. We know better how many people we need, how much equipment we need to rent, where to set out the booms. We're also working to look at having different extraction points. So last year we only had one extraction point by Kontiki, which is in front of, well, I guess it doesn't matter for the people who are not from Bonaire. We only had that one extraction point, and we know that there is still sargassum ending up in different places. The mangrove maniacs also did amazing work by preventing sargassum from entering the mangroves in different spots. But we want to be able to figure out where to place our booms, maybe where to clear some spots to put in different extraction points. That allows us to make sure that when the sargassum hits, it's not just sitting there decomposing and then impacting the ecosystem. So those are the things we're currently working on. Hopefully we don't get any sargassum. That would make my life a lot easier. But we also want to have a specific script. So just like a script to follow whenever sargassum hits. Sargassum is coming. Who do we call? Who's responsible for what? Who goes where? So that's also something we're working on, trying to finalize this year before the next sargassum event, which would also, of course, make our lives a lot easier. And that is everything. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Thank you, Roxanne.
I have a question. You talked about the water quality testing. Is that testing going to be using the lab here in Bonaire, or are you going to use the lab abroad?
As of right now, so we've had this conversation before. Right now, there aren't really any labs on Bonaire that can do the water quality testing. We have had a lot of conversations with the ministries about realizing a lab on island or even a lab in the vicinity that would be able to do the testing. So far, no dice. So as it stands, it'll probably be done by a lab off island.
I always wanted you to find one so that I can share it. That's it.
We're still working on it. There are, so we've expressed interest in having a lab here that would be able to do this kind of stuff. And what we are trying to tell the ministries is it doesn't necessarily, like the lab doesn't have to be on Bonaire. Easier for me if it's on Bonaire because I can just take my samples over. But I would like there to be a water quality lab that the ABC Islands, potentially the SSS Islands, has access to, instead of having to ship our samples all the way to the Netherlands or all the way to the US for analysis.
I do disagree with you on that, because whenever you have any type of noise or weird data that comes from water testing, then you say, okay, there was issues with the transit. So that makes looking at the water quality extremely difficult, because when you get something that doesn't make sense, you're like, oh, I'm gonna just disregard that because it happened during transit, and maybe it didn't, you know?
That's true, but completely agree with you. It's not it's more of a logistical thing. Their thinking is if we set up a lab here on Bonaire and it's only being used by Stinapa and Cargill 10 times a year or something, that's not cost effective. They need it to be something that can have, that is being used by more people.
No, and I should also mention, when you talked about the forecasting for this Tanapa, that really has improved and helped a lot in the protection of Peckelmere. So, you know, I'm not part of contributing to that, but I do receive a lot of those updates, and it does help with the planning. And I am glad that finally you will have the proper booms, because we used the yellow booms the first year and we destroyed them. I have to thank the harbor master for that, because when we returned them, they were torn completely. So they're not the right boom to use.
About, I think at least 1, maybe 2 kilometers of boom compared to the like 500 meters we had of oil booms. So that alone hopefully will make a really big difference.
And a camera in the mast behind foodies, and it's still sending out images. So Talbot helped us facilitate that. They give electricity and Wi-Fi. So even now I can look on my phone, see what's happening. There's no sarcasm today, so that's good. It would be ideal if it would be at Lagoon 2, but there we have to use, for instance, with batteries and solar power. If Wi-Fi could be arranged, but it's so remote, so the risk of theft is too high. But we have to think of a system.
And we're also, so there's this whole thing about drones on Bonaire, right? That is a legal gray area. Our policy advisor is working on that. Also, it's, I don't know, whichever ministry.
Maria Dal.
And Maria Dal.
So they're working on it.
Hypothetically, this is also an option that we could have in the future to be able to better predict what is coming in, when is it coming in, how many people do I need to call that day?
Yeah.
And the volume and etc.
I have a question. Said you guys were writing for the seagrass bats and the coral reefs, and you guys wanted to work with different organizations, but who is the end responsible for that program then?
So we would have the end responsibility. So, because it is our proposal that is being sent in. And right now we so we are thinking of working with Sabine, Stichting Internos for seagrass restoration with Reef Renewal Bonaire to do some a proper restoration of the reef right outside of Black. But at the end, of course, it's our project, so we are responsible.
Yeah. 2 Zoom questions.
All right.
What are you planning for the seagrass restoration? What kind of work are you planning to do with that?
Oh, on that question, I was just completely direct to Sabine.
You heard Karen and Marjolein, they will be here in November and they'll have the bees elements, and we already have have had experiments with bees near because we'll set up a different other trials. And also for seagrass restoration, it's not only restoration, but also protection, and they will continue to study the interaction with the invasive seagrass and turtles and whatever.
Yeah,
Yearly
so
monitoring.
part of the whole project is if you go to Luck, you'll see there are areas with seagrass that are kind of cordoned off for trampling. So part of the project is also to expand the areas that we can cordon off and have people that are there who are just tasked with maintenance and upkeep of those areas as an extra protective measure.
I don't have a question for you, but I have a question for everyone in the room, and it's online, because you're looking for water quality testing. We're also looking for sediment testing. Is there anyone on the islands that already does water quality testing or sediment testing? On the other islands within the Caribbean, Bess?
Yeah, and so for, like, let's say for our reef monitoring and the water quality testing, we want to do, yeah, fresh. So we're looking for saltwater testing, and the concentrations are just ridiculously low. Yeah, but because I did reach out to ADC, and we're looking specifically at, or for the coral reefs at that point, we were looking specifically at nutrient testing. So that's nitrates, phosphates. And because it is and salt water and such low concentrations, they can't do it. We had an extensive conversation with the lab here, Bond Lab, to see if they would be able to do it. And with the machinery they have, they can't reach the thresholds we need either.
And Karmabi's lab?
Karmabi used to have a water quality lab, but they don't have one anymore.
Yeah, I can feel it. Yeah, I mean, when Roxanne and I worked on this one. Yeah, Rox and I worked on this last year, trying to really identify a water quality monitoring lab that can test for the values that were needed in this part of the Caribbean, as far high as St. Martin. And we were unable to find a lab that can test sufficiently enough for the parameters that they were looking for. St. Martin does some very basic water quality testing at their lab there, but it also doesn't identify the type of parameters that are necessary for the type of monitoring that we wanted to do there. So one of the things that we are working on is either establishing one in the region somewhere around, or continuing our search. Maybe Trent can help us out with identifying for.
I was going to say there are quite a couple of options in Jamaica. Not so sure what the shipping options are, but there are straight flights here.
Yeah, to Curacao. So since they started those straight flights from Curacao to, and then hopefully they can just identify.
We can talk about it because even my marine lab with water quality testing now, because we've had a water chemistry lab forever, but now we're revamping it. We have brand new staff and new funding and everything. But there's an even more precise lab up at the university called ICEN. They are the nuclear center, so they get very, 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 very precise. I'm sure they can satisfy whatever.
So good question. What are the parameters exactly? What are the parameters exactly that can't be tested on?
It's not necessarily the parameters; it's the thresholds.
Threshold.
So yeah, so let's explore what we can do with UE, and then I selflessly volunteer myself to accompany the samples to.
You need 2 chaperones, really. It is a lot of samples.
And then when I used to be MPA manager in St. Eustatius, we used to do sediment testing there, so I can track down it's 12 years ago, so I'm a little bit rusty. So I'll track down what we used to do in terms of sediment testing in St. Eustatius, because it was also tied into the invasive species program, et cetera, Corralita. So I'll see if I can track down that info for you.
The sediment is at the moment interested by young, you told about Chicago Beach.
Mm-hmm.
That sediment is tested in very short.
Yeah, yesterday. I'll work on it this evening or tomorrow morning. I'll nerd out a bit. Thank you.
And I would like to add also, well, I have one. I would like to add also, so for the water quality testing, before we wrote in this concept note, and we were thinking of also testing more specifically in LAC for sargassum events, we did also reach out to the ministries in the Netherlands. So it was a very extensive search for opportunity or possibilities. And for very long with COVID, the main bottleneck also was transportation. Like even getting the samples from Seba just to Bonaire was an issue. And we're all in the same province. Are there any other questions?
I have two questions.
Yeah.
Is that for me? Yeah, I can't really hear you, but I think it's my turn. Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting presentation, Oksana, and I have a question about the sargassum. Actually, maybe two questions. One is that what we concluded 2 years ago is that it would be best to collect sargassum just off the coast, not when it ends up on the beach. So I was wondering if you have equipment to get it off the apart from booms, also like vessels or so. And the other question is, what do you do with the sargassum once it's collected?
So for the second question, we don't really do anything with the sargassum yet. Sabine touched on this a little bit yesterday. We get a lot of sargassum for Bonaire, but not a lot of sargassum just in terms of biomass. So it's really not, it wouldn't really be worth it for anybody to use the sargassum for any of the various uses that have been thrown out there, generating electricity or any of those things. And then for the first question, why we don't collect it offshore. So the entrance of LAC is about 2 kilometers?
2.
The entrance of the lagoon itself is about 2 kilometers. It is on the rougher side of the island, which makes anchoring booms out there, collection of the sargassum really, really difficult. So not
extremely expensive to have a vessel out there and fishing sargassum out of the ocean while the chance that it hits a 2 kilometer, and you have to keep patrolling and keep fishing for a long time. I think that is beyond, we don't have the money for that.
Okay, thanks.
Well, it's impractical. It's also with, it will, with all the footprint, the carbon footprint, if you have a vessel out there, I think it's next to impossible.
Right, thanks.
Okay. Do you have more questions, Eelco, or?
No, thank you. That's fine.
Okay. What?
Yes, it's my turn for questioning.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is related to sea turtles. I noticed that you said you use heavy equipment on the beaches, all reasons given. Are those beaches nesting turtle beaches? Well, you lucky. I am not hearing you.
A turtle nesting, but almost never.
Okay, well, I did not hear half of that. You only now came back in volume on my end. So could you repeat for me, please?
Yes, so can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
All right, the beaches where we get our sargassum landings are not turtle beaches or turtle nesting beaches. Sabine, like Sabine said, maybe once every 500 years or so, there's a turtle that nests there. And when I say beach, I really mean patch of sand. Rubbly, sandy, not really very appealing for, if I was a turtle, it wouldn't be very appealing for me.
Okay. Reason being because on our end, we're on the southeast coast and we get a lot of sargassum coming up, and we are also turtle nesting beaches. We have a major hotel there who uses heavy equipment. So it always poses a challenge for us when turtle nesting season is up for us to do the monitoring with the equipment there. So I was just trying to find out if you had any methods that you could have shared when it comes to monitoring the turtles before the heavy equipment comes out. But since that's not the case, I guess I will have to listen on.
Just to jump in, we had a similar problem in St. Martin. One of the major nesting beaches was also a major sargassum landing beach. And we requested that the security evening, night, and early morning staff be trained in sea turtle monitoring. So we actually went, trained the security staff in sea turtle monitoring during their usual patrols that they had to do anyway because of security for the site. They were able to identify potential nests, false crawls, attempts, successful nests, et cetera, and then usually they would let us know, which was unfortunate because oftentimes it was at 4 a.m. in the morning. And then, before any type of heavy equipment, which had to get the clearance from the security department of the hotel, before they got the clearance to go on the beach, if there was a nest there, we would relocate it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how we approached that issue that we had by training the security staff in sea turtle monitoring.
We did the same thing on our end. We even got to the point where we would GPS and flag out the nest so that if the tractor is operating before we're out, it would have been noticed. However, it was also flagging for poachers. So yeah, it's a very ticklish situation down here.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Safira. Are there more questions, solutions, suggestions, feedback? No? Okay, thank you, Rox. Oh, Jeff, one more?
Oh. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I suggest we take a 10-minute break and then we can debut our beautiful Mangrove activity?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then that gives us a little bit of time to have a little bit of discussion before the junior rangers join us at 3. So quick, 10-minute break.
Yeah, and for the junior rangers, I suggest that participants from abroad tell them about why planting is important.
You still have this one ready. I told you about, we opened up some channels. We first made a narrow trench, and this is a video of the last half meter of a 200-meter long. This is the part of the last half meter of a 200-meter long trench. Just before opening, I just wanted to show you the little water flow we created here. Let me see. So you see the elevation is not that high, you know, the difference between the lagoon and this, but it's the current is really strong. A week.
Impression.
So you saw the small trench, and it's just really flowing and flushing out.
And just as a little note, you'll see quite a lot of debris is floating through. We can set up a little net further down that catches it, and then we push it off. Now, this is so in the back mangroves, and we have enough bends of where we're working that we're able to catch it. But if we're a little bit closer up and we're concerned about it getting into the bay, it's really easy for us to put in a quick net and catch it. So that is something I just wanted, for anyone who saw that, we do consider that, and we do take appropriate actions.
Another issue, actually, I think Sabine will allow me to say it. This way of working, right now we are working towards a lagoon, which is a quite of an odd lagoon because it's very hot, very warm compared to other lagoons. So by controlling when we open up this channel, we also control. Gives us time to find out, what is the situation in that lagoon before we just flush it and let everything pass through that channel. So the first thing they do right now is do some research. Okay, what is out there? Probably the cause is bacteria, I believe, that's making it a little bit hot. But it gives us the control to do things in steps instead of just
Opening it up.
Opening it up.
And do you want to do a little introduction for the video?
Yeah.
Is that the breakthrough?
No. This is the channel just before.
We're not opening the hot channel until we understand what's going on in that channel.
Okay.
And it's really hot. It's about 40 degrees.
Yeah, it's 40 degrees on the bottom, 30 degrees on the top.
So it's that hot and it tickles on your legs as well. So that's probably very, very salty as well. Okay.
Anna, you want to introduce the next video?
Yeah. Okay.
Or Marcel, or together
Marcel,
with
you ready?
I'm ready to switch.
Okay, so right now you have the honor of a premiere. Our main promo movie. It is the work of Sabine, Jessica, and Marcel and his crew of Skyview. Yep, there it is. So enjoy for it's about 6 minutes. So enjoy our motion picture.
We have the junior rangers was forcing over.
Mangroves are unique trees that can flourish in both marine and brackish water. Worldwide, there are over 100 different species. In the Caribbean, we have 3 species: red,
black, white, and one related species, buttonwood. Mangroves have evolved over millions of years to be able to thrive in these harsh coastal environments. Unlike every other tree, they have the ability to use their roots to filter out salt from the water or excrete the salt through their leaves. Furthermore, red and black mangroves have an adapted root system which helps them in the wet environments. Red mangroves have prop roots and aerial roots that drop down from the branches. In contrast, black mangroves have roots that grow straight up, acting as snorkels in deep or muddy waters. These trees also have a unique propagation technique. The flowers don't produce seeds, but a propagule, like a small plant ready to settle. These propagules are capable of surviving in these harsh coastal environments. We benefit immensely from mangroves, both environmentally and economically. These forests provide natural materials such as wood, support high biodiversity, serve as habitat and nursery area for fish, crustaceans, and a wide variety of birds. They also filter pollutants from the water, provide a natural buffer between land and sea, and protect the coastline against erosion from strong waves, just to mention a few. Recent research has discovered additional value in climate change mitigation. They have a great capacity to store carbon from greenhouse gases and are able to protect coastlines from rising sea levels and intensifying storms. The mission of the Mangrove Maniacs is to protect and conserve the mangroves of Bonaire. We do this by restoring the water circulation in the mangrove forest. Degraded areas are restored and the mangrove area is increased through reforestation. Overdevelopment by humans and overgrazing by free-roaming grazers have left the neighboring areas of the mangroves prone to erosion. After heavy rains or winds, land sediment moves from these areas into the mangroves, infilling important channels. These channels are critical connections between the front and back of the mangroves and risk to be closed by these sediments. Using satellite imagery, scientific recommendation, and the local fisherman knowledge, The maniacs are working to restore these historic channels. Excess sediments are removed as well as branches and roots that block the channels. This way, the front and back of the mangroves are reconnected again. In addition, reforestation using young plants is also needed. To aid in this effort, the mangrove maniacs have developed nursery areas within the mangrove channels. Water passes with the tidal movements, and these new mangroves can grow and develop in their natural environment. Propagules of black and red mangroves are collected, and by using material found within the mangrove channels, these propagules are grown in biodegradable nursery bags. This technique allows us to plant them directly in the ground when ready. Grades of these new mangroves are then labeled and put in the nursery, high enough in the water so they don't drown, but deep enough so regular tidal flow can bring in fresh water. Using this method, nature takes it from here. We just conduct regular checks to ensure everything stays on track. After a couple of months, the plants can be used to boost mangroves in degraded areas and along the southwest coast. Planting mangroves in these areas will support mangroves growing naturally while also increasing future coastal protection capabilities. As an experiment, black and red mangroves have been placed at different locations throughout the mangrove forest. This helps us determine under what conditions have the highest success rate for new plants. We've already discovered many interesting things, like the importance of salinity and access to shade in young mangrove growth. Mangroves in shaded areas tend to grow faster, perhaps growing taller in search of sunlight. The conditions along the coast are very different from inside the mangrove forest of Lakpai. From strong wave action to substrate with almost no sand, these new mangroves will need to find ways to thrive in a harsh environment. To track their success, individual plants receive a unique number and/or monitored to follow their growth and success rate. Lessons learned from these experiments will help guide future reforestation efforts on the island. We hope to share these lessons within the mangrove community to help countries around the world protect these valuable habitats. Mangrove forests are fascinating for a wide variety of reasons, but perhaps their most interesting evolutionary trait is their ability to move their entire forest over generations. Their unique method of allowing papagules to float over water ensures future generations will settle wherever water is able to flow. As sea level changes, so are their natural nurseries, allowing mangroves to creep up to higher grounds, combating sea level rise. Unfortunately, if we continue to develop along these forest edges, mangroves will have nowhere to go. It becomes our responsibility to ensure these forests will always have a space on our islands. Improving the health of our current mangroves and finding new areas for mangroves to expand will help ensure these forests are around for many generations to come. To find out how you can help, please visit our website at www.mangrovemaniacs.org and stay up to date by following along on Facebook. Whether a resident on the island or a visitor, we would like to welcome you to visit the mangroves to see this truly amazing side of Bonaire.
Okay, so we still have about 10 minutes before the junior rangers come. So I know I kind of cut Arno off during his presentation. If you guys have any questions about the work the volunteers are doing or the work we're doing, maybe this is a good time to
talk about volunteer management. We're not managed.
It's a good little teaser to what you'll see tomorrow. So otherwise, relax for now.
Do you use any soil or peat moss or anything when you got the ground to stick in the soil outside?
You mean for the nursery?
For the nursery, when you all plant the nursery plants, do you add anything to the soil?
We just have the regular nursery bags, and we put them in, stick it back in, yeah.
What's the nursery bags?
When we plant them, we collect whatever is in the neighborhood in the bottom of the channel, put it in and stick in the propagule. Unless it's a black propagule, we just put it on top and no need to stick in.
But actually, some of our outplanting sites, there's very little sediment there. So we actually just place the biodegradable bag with the sediment from within the channels, and then we stack some rocks on top of it to stabilize it. And the mangroves are actually able to develop strong enough roots. They go straight into like the hard substrate. So in some cases, we really don't, it's not so much planting as it is just placing. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put you in the channels. You'll see where the fluff is. And what the fluff is.
Yeah, but along the coast, that's just salt foam. The white, you're talking about the white stuff? Yeah.
Something that looked like dried up seagrass or something. I saw someone stuffing around the property. That would be flat.
Yeah.
All right, it just came out of the channel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Them on the hard surface, they find tiny cracks, and then there are areas where you think, hey, where did they put their roots? They just find the crack and they stick there.
We look at an interesting situation where you have some people that were dredging. So you have the coast and you have the reef islands. Between the coast and the reef islands, they were dredging in between there and dumping all the whatever came out of there on land. And then you had areas that never had mangroves. All of a sudden, like mangroves started to pop up everywhere. Like all the species just popped up. And they say all they did was like dump the dredging sand on the side. I don't know if you all might have more information on that, but for us, it's a bit of I have a guess what's happening.
Some propagules came with it. Like for instance, we have been working with sargassum that was taken off the beach, and we used it for to compost it. And then suddenly we saw all the banana derif, Sisyphium, coming out of it. So you take a lot of things with it.
Yeah, I think it's probably, the propagules, the water was too deep for them to start to develop. And then once they were like in an environment of which they could develop, then they started developing.
Is that the soil on these sites was not good, and they just dumped a layer of decades of decomposing matter at the bottom of the road, which created soil that they could grow it. That's my best guess. Over there, and I heard also the dredged in Samantha, a piece where the mangroves are growing over in Samantha. Also, there was some dredging.
We have kind of 3 different environments along the south that we planted. We have pure coastal, so we have the coral sand. We have like more mud, and then we have just the limestone terrain that we just placed it on top. And to be honest, the sand they're doing very well there, which I didn't expect. And in the hard terrain, they're doing very well, which I didn't expect. The one area where they're not doing as well, but they're still doing much better than we would expect is in the muddy terrain. And that's one of the things we're working with Mateo. Perhaps it's high hydrogen sulfide, maybe in the soil, in the mud, and which is why they're not developing as well. But I mean, it's still very high success rate.
Or do we have a lifespan?
I mean, the concern someone echoed, I think maybe it was Camille echoed it. The biggest problem we have is if you wait too long, the roots start to grow together. So that when you outplant it, you have to plant like 10 mangroves together. Otherwise you do too much root damage. But
you imagine to get a property for years.
Yeah.
If you pull the roots and oh no, just keep them wet. Well, the black mangrove tends to rot if you have it soaking. Well, like red mangroves, it can soak for months, even a year. It just floats and the roots just keep growing. But black mangroves don't do so well with that. Or white, they develop a fungus.
With the black and the white mangroves, what we do is in the mangrove areas, there's these seasons where all the tropicals fall out, and you can see the roots, they start growing out, but they haven't went into the ground yet, and those are the ones we collect. And you can just throw them anywhere and they'll stick to the ground. It's just they won't survive so long if the hydrology is not right. But for them to start growing, it's easy if you pick them off the ground at the right time. I think it's around this time of year.
That's it, actually right now. So
Yeah.
tomorrow you'll see them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With the red propagules, you will see like tiny bumps forming on them. With the black ones, they will lose the outer layer, and you see this little fluffy white tail sticking out. And with the white ones, I don't remember. Oh yeah, with the white ones, I actually took them out where they already grew a bit of the roots into the ground, but then it's so shallow that with a shovel, I could just shovel under them, and you could get hundreds just on one shovel, just sticking out. So it's just going into the mangroves in the right season and just picking them from the ground.
Has it been testing with hydroponics and because some of the stuff about the bell site, you let the water drop and then.
Yeah, I did it in a mangrove mesh and it works. You can make a better siphon and do the fluctuation. Yeah, it works.
Propagules, they're okay, they won't drown, but if you put the black mangrove propagules and they get drowned, you'll kill them. So we proposed Matteo to build a floating nursery, but we still have to work on that.
Yeah, to be completely honest, the red mangroves are, in our experience, in our environment, they're pretty hardy. You can do pretty much whatever you want with them, and they do all right. The black mangroves, it's been a little bit more of a learning curve, and we're having more success, but they are a lot more temperamental. So we have it has been successful, but not as successful as the red mangroves. So yeah, if you guys have good black mangrove techniques, that we could improve that.
Do you propose to wait for the, what time do they usually come in?
There's now 3 p.m. and normally it's 4 p.m. So it's not so much it's more
People in, or they will be here at 3?
it's
Past 3. So
You can have
I think I saw, but they have come here before. What?
Take like a 10-minute break and then after 10 minutes, if they're not here, we decide. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
good luck, good luck. Yeah, yeah, see ya. All right, guys. So the last little session we had planned for today is going to be canceled. So this now.
Well, maybe not.
Oh.
But for the, if the two ranges come, we wait a couple of more minutes, but for the Zoom session, we finish now and we thank all the participants and we hope to be able to send out the proceedings and send more information to you. So we'll close off the Zoom session. We'll have one more session for everybody here. And that may be very short, but
Yeah, and anyone in the Zoom world, if you visit the workshop website, you can join our mailing list. And then, because I know there were a lot of people asking for more information, that's a really good way to receive information through email. And we will also create a little database of all the presentations that were given today that have been cleared for public release. So with contact information. So if you want to reach out to any of the presenters that presented, that would be a great resource for you guys. Yeah, thank you very much. We're going to close Zoom now. So thank you. Yeah.
It's too much. You don't have to take it off.